think not just the icons, but the sense of and all of the intellectual things that I've been describing. I had come to a place where I realized that I can't live in my head, and I can't stay in my head all the time, and I can't always be working things out analytically and trying to piece things together. So for me, the icons and the Vesper service, like and the smells, it was different in a way that for me actually was, I guess, inviting, because it wasn't calling me to stand and think, right? It was calling me to worship and to just be present. And so I found that for me to be a very nice change.
How beautiful. I think honestly that a lot of people who come in intellectually, it takes them a long time to get there. And it's really lovely that for you, that was such an easy and quick and almost like a relief, right? To just finally sort of to worship with your body.
The ancient faith for the modern world. This is Ancient Faith Radio.
Welcome to Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living in relationship to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Your questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening and welcome to Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. We are so delighted that you're joining us on this Tuesday evening. My name is Father Nicholas Lowe, and I'm a priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church right here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Lowe, who's a clinical psychologist. And friends, over the last several years, many of you know this already because you're already loyal Healthy Minds, Healthy Soul listeners. But we've been joined together with the Ancient Faith family to bring you a show that we hope helps to bring you closer in your walk of faith by merging faith and psychology together. This show came about because we believe that for so many people, we can struggle in truly applying and practicing our faith in everyday life, where we are struggling in our marriages, in our finances, in our purpose, in our thought life. So if you've ever wanted to talk to a priest or a psychologist or both, then Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls, we hope, will be a show for you. You can find out more about us and about our ministry by going to our website at thelows.com. That's LOUHS.com, thelows.com. And we also encourage you to join us on our social media platforms. We're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, all under the headings of The Lows. And if you're like us, if you're always looking for some just encouraging messages to inspire you throughout the day, then we encourage you to take a moment to subscribe to our daily inspirational messages that we send out every single day. If you'd like to get these messages, you go to our website at thelows.com. Click on the subscribe button, and right there you'll ask for your email address. Simply put in your email address, and every day we will send you a daily word of encouragement. Once again, that website is thelows.com.
Well, this evening you are in for such a thrilling show. We are so blessed to be welcoming author Brandi Willis Schreiber. She has just released her first published book, and it's entitled A Long Walk with Mary, A Personal Search for the Mother of God. It was just released on April 6th, so you're in for a real treat, and it's available right here on Ancient Faith and, of course, Amazon. Brandi is a published author of poetry, nonfiction, and award-winning fiction. She's a longtime native of West Texas and writes between two horizons, between the invisible expanse of the Texas plains and the intersection of where the human heart meets faith, which is so near and dear to our hearts, especially in light of what we talk about so much on our show. Brandi is a convert to Orthodoxy and holds a master's degree in English with an emphasis in creative writing and poetry, as well as a bachelor's in English language and literature, both from Texas Tech University. A Long Walk with Mary, a personal search for the Mother of God. This is her new book, and we're so excited to welcome her to the show. Brandi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited. When we got the book, we just dug right in, and I cannot wait to finish. We got a bit through, and it was so, all of the detail was amazing. You know, you pulled a reader into the environment. I felt like I was sitting right there with you in the room, hearing everything that you were writing about. I mean, so you're a fabulous writer to begin with.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book.
Well, as you mentioned in that lovely introduction, I am a convert to Orthodoxy. I grew up in a Church of Christ background, for which I am very grateful for. I have wonderful roots of faith because of that. But along the way, I had a lot of questions, and my husband and I were seeking answers to questions that we felt that Eastern Orthodoxy was able to answer for us. And so through the course of, becoming Orthodox, which for us was a little over 10 years ago, when you're coming from an evangelical Protestant background and you're moving into Orthodoxy, there is so much that bombards you, so much that you were not used to before, so many wonderful things. And one of the things that, of course, is new to converts to Orthodoxy from Protestantism is this idea of Mary, right? Because Mary is on the fringes, if I could put that in the most polite way possible, for a lot of folks from our background. And so when I first became Orthodox, she was very much on the forefront of my mind. And I write about this in the book, but I found myself having a very emotional reaction to saying prayers to her in church, and just feeling kind of this pull that I need to figure out what these emotions and these feelings are. And that lasted for about 10 years. And it wasn't until a Lenten service a couple of years ago that during the Akathist prayers to the Theotokos, I broke down right in front of her icon. And it had happened before. And I thought, you know what? I think that I need to explore what this is about, and I need to really get on the bandwagon and figure out, what do I think about Mary? What is my relationship with Mary? And how do I go about really understanding and developing a relationship with her? And so, I'm a big reader, and I really enjoy memoir. And so part of what my experience is when I'm learning about new things is I like to read other people's stories. And I just had a really hard time finding modern accounts of people that had developed a devotion to the Theotokos, had developed a relationship with Mary from an Eastern Orthodox perspective. And I read a lot of the Church Fathers. I read a lot of background information on her. I read Beverly D'Onofrio's Looking for Mary. She's an author who describes herself as a lapsed Catholic. And her book was a memoir about a pilgrimage that she took to Bosnia to encounter Mary. But I just couldn't find anything from the Orthodox perspective. And so, as I'm going through this experience of thinking about Mary and wanting to explore, what are these emotions that I have around her, and really what do I understand about her, I thought, you know what, maybe I need to really dive into this and spend some time learning about her, reading about her, praying to her, and journaling that journey, and just see where it takes me. And so what I really wanted from that was to give other people, folks that were converts to Orthodoxy, or maybe just had questions about Mary, some kind of resource they could go to read about that experience in real time, kind of in the modern life. And so that's really what inspired me to write that.
And she's such, and obviously an amazing woman of faith. I think the preeminent example that we have as Christians on this earth of someone that was just like everyone else who said yes to God, and some of the most unbelievable circumstances that were encircling her at that time. I mean, being a young Jewish girl at the time, going against what her family probably knew. I mean, so many things that we don't even realize, that we almost take for granted that she did. And I love the fact that in this book you talk about this as as encouraging people to meet Mary and to get to know her, because for many of us, even in the Orthodox Church, who grew up in the Orthodox Church, we take for granted that we have her, that she is in a preeminent position in our church.
Is so true.
And with the exception of the few, the several feast days that we have in honor of her, we really don't just look to her all the time as our guide. And so I've with what I've read within the book, I've been thoroughly impressed, and I do want to encourage our listeners, as is the case every single time that we join you, to join the conversation. We truly believe that there's growth in the conversation. So join our show tonight. You can call in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also be following along our show if you have access to Ancient Faith Radio's social media page or the Lowe's Facebook page. We are broadcasting that as well on those social media platforms.
And welcome to all of you who are already in that platform. We see you on Facebook. It's nice to see you all.
Yes, and we encourage you as well. If you want to have a question that you want us to share with Brandi, please, you can just put it in the comment line, and we will definitely get to that. Okay.
So yes, I what you just echoed there, Nick, I want to echo that. The meeting Mary and getting to know her, the personal search, that does feel so personal, because I do think you're right. If you've been cradle Orthodox, born and raised in the church, I think we all you can take it for granted, and you don't get to know, that she's the mother of Christ, and you're used to seeing the venerating the icon and knowing her role, but really getting to know her journey. And this took me back to thinking how often we think about what people are going to think of us. And must that have gone through her mind? What are people going to think of me? And yet she chose to submit her own will for God's will. And what a tremendous amount of courage that had to have taken, and a tremendous amount of faith. And so, yes, talk to us about, I guess, the most surprising thing you've learned about her during this process.
Well, I did a lot of reading over this year that I spent really wanting to get to know the Theotokos and to develop a devotion to her. And, beyond the facts and legends of her life, the things that we can embrace as Orthodox Christians because we're comfortable with mystery, right? Because they all point to spiritual truths. I think the thing that surprised me the most was this incredible sense of intimacy that developed. Seeking her, engaging her. If you read the book from beginning to end, you'll find out that it was a rather difficult year. I was coming into writing about this experience from a pretty broken place emotionally and spiritually. And then all kinds of things happened during that year. And then it ended with COVID. I
lovely.
think the thing that was the most surprising was that through all of that, there was a real sense of intimacy that developed. And I want to encourage people that are listening, to this interview and to this show, that whenever you start to progress down any kind of spiritual path, God is going to make a way for you. If there is a hint of interest or curiosity or something that has just been nagging at you, what's going to happen is if you start to explore that, things are going to happen in a very big way. And that was definitely my experience. The book has a lot of information about church tradition, about Mary and history about her, and obviously references to the Bible and our understanding of her place in Christ's life. But the most surprising thing was definitely the relationship that was developed and the connections that occurred because of her. And they went across all faith backgrounds, all, spiritual backgrounds, all kinds of personality backgrounds. that's just who she is. And that's what happens whenever you start to engage something on that kind of spiritual level.
Mm-hmm.
And talk to us a little bit about that. I'd like to develop that for a moment, the relationship you've developed with her and how that relationship affects your own relationships in your day-to-day life. How does having that intimacy with her kind of come out in your own day and maybe perhaps even in your own relationships or in your own thought process?
Well, I think first that relationship starts with vulnerability. And
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
reading, I'm reading Wounded by Love right now. And one of the things that is conveyed in that is that when you read the lives of the saints, you're sanctified through that process. And so when I was reading about her life and I was journaling about everything that was happening, I started to really find my own self a great deal self-conscious about my own limitations and failings and what was happening in my personal relationships in life. And so when you start to pray to your patron saint or to the Mother of God, or, anybody that has, that is before us, you're going to encounter difficulties with that. You're going to encounter some vulnerability because that's the only way that intimacy can occur. And Metropolitan Anthony Bloom is one of my favorite authors in terms of prayer. And I did a lot of reading of his book on beginning to pray and courage to pray. And he talks about in that book that, the day when God is absent, when he's silent, that's the beginning of prayer. And I was coming into a place in this seeking Mary where I felt like God was really silent, that he was absent in my life. And so beginning to work, in cooperation with her, beginning to pray to her really helped me see kind of where I was absent, perhaps in some of my own personal relationships. And so it's like, I guess you could call it a link between us and what is greater and more powerful than us, right? She's the lifeline that connects kind of this sense of, I'm here, I'm living out this very ordinary life and I'm doing these things with my family and with my job. But if I'm keeping in mind the example that she sets and why she's so important to us in our faith, then I have to keep in mind the example and the life that I need to be living for the people around me as well. And so I think that the way my relationships changed is that I was just became more compassionate, more understanding, both with the people in my life as well as with myself. There was a lot of grace that happened in that process.
Right.
I love hearing that, more compassionate and more understanding to yourself, because I do think that there's this trap that the enemy sets forth for us when we begin reading the lives of the saints, or we begin reading the church fathers, or we begin reading the life of Mary. There is this self-consciousness about our own limitations, about the things we're not doing as well. And sometimes that trap is the moment that people say, "Ooh, this is uncomfortable. I don't want to think about that." And they depart from that reading. And it's the discomfort that breaches the whole, that stops the learning and the wisdom and the knowledge. And being able to be comfortable with that and listening to you talk about that is so beautiful, because that's the transcendence, right? That's the part where we are changed and we grow and you learn to be more compassionate and more understanding, even with yourself. And what that's such epitomize the life of Mary, coming into your own life. And so you didn't stop learning, you didn't stop growing, obviously, because you wrote this entire book. So,
and it's continuing, right? Like it's a journey that's not ended. It continues to evolve every single day.
So just kind of building on the fact that the whole process of writing the book, I think, Brandi, our listeners would love to just hear how were you changed during this process?
Oh, goodness. Well, I would say that I was better able to bear the blows of life that came before, during, and after the process of writing this with more strength and grace. Because as I mentioned, it was a very difficult personal year. And going through this process of kind of an accountability piece too, of I'm going to continue to learn about Mary. I'm going to continue to engage her. I'm going to continue praying to her. It really, I couldn't give up. And there's a section of the book where I talk about dryness, about going through a period where things were not going great. I had made what I considered spiritual progress in terms of my prayer life and how I was feeling about everything and what I thought I knew. And then, it comes crashing down, right? Because we aren't consistent, perfect people constantly. And so I would say too that my prayer life improved significantly. And that's really the first step in all of this. I don't think that we can develop any kind of relationship with God or the saints if we don't start with prayer, right? Like this is the very first place that we have to come to. And the places where I fell, it makes me think about St. Isaac the Syrian, who said, don't fall into despair when you stumble. It's better to be bruised than dead. That's very much the experience that I have. And so my prayer life improved, I put that in quotes. But it continued to be a challenge because it's always growing, right? It's always evolving as well, because it's never a completed thing.
And it becomes, I don't know if you felt the same way. I know after we finished our book, it almost felt like the book became a mirror for us, and we were constantly evaluating our life based upon what we are writing and how we measure up to what we are sharing. And so I love what you're sharing. And if you're just tuning in tonight, we're so happy that you're joining us on Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. We are speaking with Brandi Willis Schreiber. She's the author of a brand new book that's out at Ancient Faith called Meeting Mary in Your Life.
Actually, it's A Long Walk with Mary.
Walk with Mary, exactly.
A personal search for the Mother of God. We named the show something brilliant, but we were getting confused between the show and the title of the book. So A Long Walk with Mary.
Thank you, Roxanne, for taking that and helping me out with that. But what we were talking about is really in the person of the Virgin Mary, someone that oftentimes within the Orthodox Church is embraced, is loved. We lean on her. There's services specifically to her that we have, especially during Lent. We have on Friday nights in the Greek Orthodox tradition, at least. But it's often misunderstood in the West, especially in Protestant churches. And I really kind of want to go back to what you were mentioning earlier, Brandi, with regards to coming from a Protestant background. What are some of the things that you oftentimes would hear people talk about when they would talk about Mary?
Great question. I was curious about that too. I was actually just going to ask that.
I think historically, coming from a Protestant background, the things that I would hear would be couched in suspicion, or this sense that it was worshiping Mary and not God, that somehow her role was usurping the role that Christ and God, the Trinity, have in our life. And so sometimes I would be met with just a stark hostility toward that. It's quote unquote looks too Catholic, or just, and really this is the perspective that I take more, is just a gentle not knowing, just a misunderstanding and non-familiarity with Mary and kind of the history of her life and what we value as extremely important in Orthodoxy, because we have the rich tradition of the church and all of these, all of the writings, all of the people from, 2,000 years that have lauded her, but also captured details of her life that aren't readily available to a lot of people because maybe they just rely on the Bible. And so, it was a range, and I'm very compassionate toward that perspective because I came from that, and you just don't know, when you're coming from a Protestant background, unless you've done some studying or some reading, you just don't know. But the other part of that too is, unless you want to engage it, unless you really want to get to know her, you're not going to draw near. And I think
let me just kind of build.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me just build upon that. What would you say? Because obviously, with Ancient Faith, you have a lot of people who are inquiring about the Orthodox Church. So maybe perhaps there's some listeners on the show this evening that maybe are just inquiring, and that becomes a stumbling block for them. That this idea that we are usurping Christ, that we are worshiping Mary. What would you tell a listener on the show tonight who may come from a Protestant background, who's contemplating the Orthodox Church? what would you tell them about how the Orthodox Church looks at the Virgin Mary?
Oh, wonderful question. Well, I think the way to first approach that is to look to Christ, because our understanding and relationship of Mary, the way that we engage her and interpret her, is always Christological. It's always Christ-centered and not Mary-centered. And she always points the way, literally and figuratively, to Christ. And so I think if you start first with that foundation, that this isn't about Mary, this is about how Mary influences Christ. This is about Mary's role in our salvation, thanks to the fact that she was Christ's mother. That really kind of changes the landscape of our understanding of Mary. And I think too, what I would tell someone is we kind of have to start with our understanding of who Jesus is before we start with our understanding of who Mary is. Because as Orthodox Christians, we believe that he was fully God and fully man, right? He was both things at the same time. And so when we look at who Christ is, we have to look at who Mary is as a result. And we want to encourage people that when they're looking at the icons or they're listening to prayers, to think about how all of these things are in context with our faith. Like, for example, Mary is very rarely featured in Orthodox icons without Christ. There are a few that exist, but the vast majority of them, Christ is there. And that's because he is the focus, not necessarily her as a separate entity. This is why we don't have, statues of her all by herself and those types of things. And so I think I would tell someone first to just be open to those foundational ideas, and then start small, kind of see what these things are pointing to, what these prayers are actually saying. There was a wonderful example that my priest gave me when I was a catechumen, and we were first talking about Mary so many years ago. And he said, because I'd asked him about this whole idea of praying to the saints and praying to the Mother of God. And he said, if you were walking along, a road, and you saw that someone in a river was drowning and they were crying out, "Save me, help me," would you keep walking and say, "I'm not going to do that because God's going to do that. God's the one who's in charge of that"? No, we would reach down and we would do what we could to pull that person up. And so that's the role that Mary has for us. We cry out to her, "Help me, save me," not because she's the one that's going to do it, but because she's the great intercessor. She's the one that loves us the most and is there for us as Christ's mother, to pray for us, and as she does for all of humanity and for the entire world. And so to kind of think of it that way, and to not look at it as such a black and white phenomena, because it's it's unnerving if you are.
Absolutely. You're right.
I'll never forget the first time I walked into our Greek Orthodox church here in the town that I live in, and here's candles, here's incense, here's all this just bombardment of sensation, and right there in the front is an icon of Theotokos right to the left of Jesus. And so just as I mentioned earlier, being open and kind of vulnerable to experiencing that, and not letting it scare you. Start with being supple, and just seeing what you learn from that experience.
Well, if you're just tuning into the show, we are blessed to be speaking with Brandi Schreiber, and she's just written a book entitled A Long Walk with Mary, A Personal Search for the Mother of God. And we've been learning about this intimate relationship that she's sort of developed with Mary, and how much it's changed her own life, how she changed in the process, and how it's changed her relationships. And we were just asking a little bit about what advice, you, Brandi, would be giving to others, because I don't think you're alone in experiencing those same sensations when you walk for the first time into an Orthodox church and you're met with all of these, sort of maybe what could be confusing things. And so I want to ask you, and before I ask you this question, I want to remember to state the number, because I know there's a lot of people who want to call in and ask you a question. That number for all of you who are listening is 1-855 1-855-237-2346. That number again is 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question during the show at ask@ancientfaith.com. So Brandi, tell us, what advice would you give to someone who may be searching for the Theotokos in their own life?
Gird yourself. Be prepared for things to happen. No, Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, he wrote, I can't remember if it's in Beginning to Pray or Courage to Pray. He says that God's love is remorseless. And if you begin this journey of wanting to draw closer to something, he is going to make a way. And he's going to be very unapologetic about it. And so what I would say is, I say that with a little bit of humor, but it's true. Prepare yourself for change. If you are asking to get to know Mary and invite this into your life, prepare to be faced with both joys and challenges in that journey. But I would say too, start small, start so very, very small. Just start by looking at an icon first. Try to separate out your intellect or your emotions and just look at it first. Examine her expression, contemplate on the prayers that are maybe being said during the liturgy, or if you have a prayer book, or if you Google them online. Start really, really, really little. I would walk at this playa lake down by my house when I was kind of first starting this whole experience of trying to understand who she is and figure out how to integrate her into my life. And I would walk around the water and I would say the same prayers that the nuns at Divayevo Monastery in Russia would say when they were first establishing their convent there. And, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, for you have borne the Savior of our souls. And so start really small with little things like that. And I think you'll be surprised at how they just create a bit of an opening for a thought, or a change in your perspective, or a different type of conversation that you have with God. And that's the other thing too, is if you read the book or you talk to anybody that's kind of gone through something similar, what I think you find is it's not that your relationship with Mary is the only thing that changes. It's that your faith overall changes. And I found myself praying, to Jesus. I found myself praying big prayers to God more. I found myself, memorizing all kinds of prayers that I'd wanted to know for forever, because it just created an opening where there was more opportunity to connect as a whole, in terms of my faith. And that was really wonderful. So, just start really small with what's in front of you. And then in time, when you feel more comfortable or you feel like things might be shifting in your life, expand then to reading some of the more heady stuff. There's a lot of wonderful books out there that are both Orthodox and non-Orthodox and secular about Mary. But I would say just start with what you have access to right in front of you, and things will definitely happen.
Going back to what you were mentioning earlier, Brandi, and just kind of building on the, in many ways, I guess the confusion or maybe just the misinterpretation of who Mary is in Christianity. Why do you think so many people are unfamiliar with or dare I say, almost hostile towards Mary? What would you say are the reasons for that?
I think that people just don't know. I think there's a lot of reasons actually, and I can't possibly be in everybody's head, but I think it really first starts with just understanding who she is in her role in our faith. I read a wonderful book that I would have to recommend. Father David Smith wrote Mary, Worthy of All Praise, Reflections on the Virgin Mary. And he had an amazing quote in there that I just want to share with everybody. It says, every culture must confront her mystery. Every Christian must face the debt that we have to her. And so I think it has to start with understanding who she is, first of all, in our faith. And if you don't have access to that information or knowledge of her, or if you're coming from a perspective where your current theological background doesn't allow you to explore that, that can create a lot of fear and hostility. And then I think too, how do you develop a relationship with the saints? I mean, this is another thing in Orthodoxy that we have all gotten, that we all converts have to get used to, is you pray to the saints. Like, what is that? That's completely new and different. We don't, but the reality is that we ask our friends and family to pray for us when we're going through difficulties. And so but
we can't ask saints.
Yes. I know, right? But it's little things like that you're just not exposed to, or maybe you haven't been given permission to explore those thoughts and ideas. And so that's just the wonderful thing about Orthodoxy, is that suddenly the gates are just open to all of this information and the tradition and the history and access, right? It's like access to God and everyone who has gone before that you just had a tiny slice of. And that's how I felt in my previous experience. And,
I mean, it's so interesting because I think hostility is tied to fear. I mean, anger and anxiety are two sides of the exact same coin in our brain. I mean, it's, and so people often become angry when they're really just afraid of something. We don't know enough about it, and they're afraid to go outside of something that they have been taught or something they've known their whole life. I mean, I'm so curious about how you transcended fear. I mean, there had to have been some level of fear. Should I do that? This is bad, or this is wrong, or, and somehow you transcended that.
And to write a book.
Enough to become curious, enough to then acquire knowledge, enough to then produce a book where you're now teaching others. That's a process.
And I was just so hungry for something different. That's part of the reason that we became Orthodox. I say we, because I'm including my husband in this conversation. That's the whole reason, is because we knew that there had to be something more. There had to be something that would get at the questions that we had, that everything else we had explored just couldn't reach. And so there was a lot of fear with that, I think, again, we go back to people maybe not understanding. I don't think a lot of people are really familiar with Eastern Orthodoxy. I was talking with a wonderful friend of mine, chatting with him from grad school, because he read my book, and he mentioned too that he wasn't really sure how he felt about the theology of Mary, but he was grateful for the spiritual journey and the, I guess, honesty that I included in my chapters. And, he left the Church of Christ as well, and pursued a different denominational sect. And so I think for us, I was just so ready for something that was bigger and more whole in my faith. I just knew there had to be something more. And so when we were first catechumens and going through this whole process, and I'm learning about Mary a little bit, as a brand new Orthodox Christian, and I'm talking to my priest and kind of exploring these questions and things that you have to debunk when you're Eastern Orthodox, such as the fact that, we believe, yes, she was the Virgin Mary, but in Orthodoxy, she was the ever Virgin Mary, right? Like, she did not have biological children. And that's something that most people are unfamiliar with, right? So again, it started with this sense of, I have to have something better in my faith. And so when we began discussing these questions about Mary, I kind of just accepted, like, okay, that makes perfect sense. Because it does. It's actually quite rational once you have all of this background information. And then, my journey toward getting to know her and really understand her better over the 10-year period between when I became Orthodox and when I started the book was also about overcoming fear, because, as I mentioned, I had kind of an emotional breakdown in front of her icon when I was saying the Akathists to him. And that was a result of some personal challenges and hurts that I had in my own life. And I had to figure out my role as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, in relation to this woman, this mother, this person right here in front of me that I'm staring at 50% of the time during the liturgy. And so that was painful. I'm not going to lie. That was a hard process.
Is this a book that, how old do you have to be? I think of the millions of young females in our church, that would love to develop a relational role with the Virgin Mary. I mean, is this for adolescents, or do you really need to be sort of have some life experience under your belt to sort of appreciate the content of the book?
I would say that a preteen adolescent could read this. It's not a very long book, and there's a lot that I include from the reading and the research that I did. But I hope that it comes across in a very accessible way. I'm an ordinary layperson. I haven't been to seminary. I don't have an advanced degree in divinity. I'm just a regular person who explored this in her regular life. And so I think it's accessible, to young girls, high school for sure. And then all the way up to, your 90s. So, I definitely, there's parts of the book, I'm trying to find the right words on how to describe it, about difficulties that one would experience, in her grown life. But I think that a preteen or someone for sure in high school, a young woman in high school, would be more than, able to read this and connect with it. And men too. I want to point that out, that this isn't just for, this isn't just for female readers. This is definitely for male readers too. You're probably going to get something different out of it, but, if it could serve as a blueprint or a guide to your own life, then wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for joining us tonight on Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. We're so delighted to be speaking with Brandi Willis Schreiber. She's the author of a brand new book called A Long Walk with Mary, A Personal Search for the Mother of God. You can find it right here at ancientfaith.com, actually store.ancientfaith.com. It's also found on Amazon as well. And we do encourage you to join the conversation tonight. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question during the show at ask@ancientfaith.com. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side of this break, we're going to talk to Brandi about really what are her hopes when people read this book, that hopefully that they can receive and be filled with after they take some time to read this book. So stay right with us.
Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls with Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne Lowe will be back in a moment. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-AF-RADIO. They would love to hear from you.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for living, the person you were created to be? Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan gives you the keys to unlock areas of your life that hold you back from fully experiencing the renewal and transformation God has in mind for you. Co-authored by a priest and a psychologist, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, Renewing You combines principles of spiritual growth with psychological tools to help you become your best self, fully connected with God's purpose for you. To purchase this book, please go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls and Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne Lowe. You have a question for the Lowes? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-AF-RADIO. Here once again is Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne Lowe.
Well, welcome back to Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. We are speaking with Brandi Schreiber, the author of A Long Walk with Mary, a personal search for the Mother of God, just released on April 6th. So what a blessing it is to have you with us, Brandi, tonight.
Thank you.
Talk to us about journaling. I'm a huge fan of journaling. So, the idea of journaling accompanying the writing of the book, we journaled so much through our book. In fact, the book was sort of born out of just memoirs of writing over 5 years. Talk to us about your experience with journaling throughout the book.
Well, I've always been a big journaler too. And it's always been a fantastic psychological release for me. What's going on in my life? How do I feel about this? As well as part of the process and the timeline of, just keeping track of what's happening in my life. And so what I would do, and what I've always done really, was take some time to just sit down and jot out some notes about what was happening with me, what was I reading, what were the things that I was discovering in the books that I was going through, or the prayers that I was studying, or details of her life, or what would happen at church. And when you take a step back and you look back at everything, you realize that your journal it's laid the foundation. It's created the framework for the story. And so because I was journaling about the things that I was learning and that were impactful to me, they really kind of helped create that framework for the book. And it took place over a year. And I kind of followed the seasons in the book, because that's just the path of how that year unfolded, obviously. And I also like the way that there are seasons in the church, and that we kind of have this cyclical experience with the church year and the liturgies, and when certain gospel readings are read and that kind of thing. And so it helped me to not only process what I was learning and experiencing, but also take a step back and examine, what does it mean? And then I could take those things, to my priest. If I had a question that I came across, I could discuss it with him, or if I needed to delve deeper in something, or if I needed to spend some more time focusing on an area of my life that wasn't going so hot, that was just incredibly helpful. And so I recommend journaling to everybody, regardless of whether or not you want those words to be incorporated into a creative project someday.
And that they often do. So we have a question that came in, and it asks, what is the Orthodox view on Mary being sinless? Brandi, what are your thoughts?
That is a great question. We know, obviously, that there was only one perfect one, and that is Christ. Christ is the only person that we can ever say was without sin. But we know that Mary was pretty darn close to that, right? She was human, just like everybody else is human. And although in our perspective and tradition of her life that we look at, she did not intentionally commit any sins, right? Because This is why she was chosen, and this is what makes her such a wonderful vessel to be the Mother of God. We understand at the same time that she was human, and so she really represents for us the ultimate example of what we are striving for as human beings. She is as close to what we can possibly hope for as we can get. And so, Father, if there's anything that you could add to that.
No, you did beautifully, actually. I mean, okay. I think you did great. And I think that's so important for people to realize, is that because there is a doctrine or a belief within the Orthodox Church that she chose not to sin. And so that although that she's in this world like all of us, that she experienced all of what we experience, much like Christ. I mean, I think that's so beautiful about our Savior, that we worship a God that the Bible says poured out everything for his people, so that he chose to endure everything that his people would experience, the shame, the sadness, the loneliness, whatever it may be, to fully experience what he created, what they would go through. And here you have the Virgin Mary, who, by her choices, and I think that's so important, and another area to highlight within her, Brandi, and I think that's what you were beautifully stating, is, how she chose. And I think, again, because sometimes the scriptures are a couple verses here and there about the Virgin Mary, and if you're simply coming from a church tradition that is only sola scriptura, where you're only looking at scripture, and you neglect the written tradition that the oral tradition that St. Paul talks about, that we have to hold fast to, then you can forget about how the disciples themselves leaned on her. Why?
Right.
Because of not only her motherly nature, but she was like their leader. I mean, she was one that guided them. And so she made amazing choices, and she became an example to so many people, so much so that you see, from the very beginning, that the church fathers were writing a lot about her, but also the saints and the saints of the saints were leaning on her for guidance. And that to me is just another example of just how it gives us an opportunity that in our world where we're so tempted by the flesh, we're so tempted to let our feelings lead us as opposed to our choices lead us. You know, we're able to look at Mary and say, wow, here's a young woman who makes, I think I tell this to our youth. I mean, could you imagine saying to Joseph, I'm pregnant and God is the father? I mean, it's just, you know, when you think about it, it's just like, I mean, people are going, what are you talking about? You know, but she did that. And you have to imagine that there were probably members of her family or maybe friends of hers that were going, what are you talking about? This is not the Messiah. He's not coming to you. And what makes you so special? And what makes you, and her having to deal with all that, and yet her choices continued to guide her. Her faith in God kept guiding her. And that's why to me, she's someone that obviously as a priest, I lean on her a lot in my own prayer life because I look at her as a mother to all of us in the way in which we all are called to live. So I'm really appreciating your book. And once again, if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Brandi Willis Schreiber. She's the author of a brand new book that's featured right here at Ancient Faith called A Long Walk with Mary, A Personal Search for the Mother of God. You can find it right here at store.ancientfaith.com or on amazon.com. And you can also, we just encourage you, we only have a few more minutes left of the show, but definitely call in. If you've got any questions for Brandi, you can call in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or you can email us at ask@ancientfaith.com.
We also had an email come in just wanting to express their gratitude to you for writing this book as a female in the church, stating that there often are not a lot of books written about relationships with other females that they can look up to. So that is an incredible testament to what you have done. So that's beautiful.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Brandi,
Thank you.
And I'm sure you're going to get a lot of that because I think people are just so hungry for not only just having that kind of intimate relationship, that connectivity with the Virgin Mary, because I think even within the Orthodox Church too, Roxanne, I think sometimes, we as Orthodox Christians, we have her in this great seat of honor on the icon screen, the iconostation. But sometimes we can just, we can forget to lean on her in our times of struggle, and especially as you were mentioning earlier, the Akathistos or the Akathist hymn that we chant. I mean, they're just filled with amazing testimonies and poetic verses about how extraordinary she is and how much we need to lean on her. But in our last few moments of our show, Brandi, I'd love to just ask you, what would for the people that are kind of growing in their walk of faith, or who just maybe searching for the Orthodox Church, or maybe they're feeling that same emptiness that you felt, and which became the impetus of you looking for the Orthodox Church. What would be some words of encouragement that just in general that you would give to them as they're listening to the show tonight?
Oh, to not despair. There are answers for you. There's always answers for you. There's always a place to go. Obviously I'm a fan of Orthodoxy, but it's definitely, I feel like in my own life, the place where I have gotten the answers that I've always wanted, but also that is okay with saying, I don't know. The thing about Orthodoxy is it's okay with mystery. It's okay with some mysticism. It's okay with saying, well, we think that this is kind of the truth, but there's some people that disagreed about this for a couple of 100 years. And I found that so incredibly comforting coming from a background where I was told it was either this or that, you're right or you're wrong. This is how it's going to be. It was very refreshing to me. And so please do not despair. If you are feeling lost or you just don't know where to go or you're frustrated, start small. Watch a liturgy online. If you don't feel comfortable going to one, that's the wonderful thing about what's grown out of this pandemic is we have lots of online resources. Talk to other people, get involved in maybe some groups online. Reach out to us. Ask us a question. You can get our email addresses. But don't despair, because if, like I said earlier, God will find a way. His love is remorseless. He is not going to apologize for getting you to the place where your heart ultimately needs to be. And there are so many entrances to that through the Orthodox faith and through all of the resources available to you. And so yes, reach out, let someone, ask your questions,
Right.
see what we can do to help you in your
I
journey.
love that.
We did get a question that came in just recently about, the notion of we are taught so much from the church fathers and obviously in the Bible that we have to love God more than we love the people in our lives, that ultimately he is first. And Mary's story is a testament to that she had to love God more than her love for her own child. The person asking the question is, what are your thoughts on that, Brandi? And is that in the book?
Yes, it's in the book. Yes, in multiple places. It's in the book. Because again, we go back to this choice that she made. She gave the eternal yes. She was told from the very beginning, yes, and a sword shall pierce through your soul too.
Right.
She knew that something bad was going to happen, and she didn't know what it was going to be. The ultimate sacrifice of watching your child, who also happens to be the Son of God, murdered by the people that he strove so much to change and benefit and save. And so, if you just put yourself for a perspective in a parent's shoes and imagine your child in front of you being brutally murdered and no one is doing anything about it, there's nothing that you can do. You're witness to that. But you knew that something this terrible was coming your way, but you still said yes, right? She still said yes, knowing that at any point along this journey, the fact that she was pregnant, the fact that, she was, young and alone, all these other things that happened, very, very difficult life circumstances, constantly being probably behind the scenes, listening to all of the Pharisees and everybody else talking about how Christ was a liar and it was wrong and all of this, but staying with him nonetheless because she knew and she believed, right? She's she is the very first believer. And so we know all of this about her. And so, yes, this is definitely addressed in the Bible. And excuse me, not in the Bible, in the book. It's in the Bible too. But this idea too that we love God. By loving God, it allows us to love others equally as much as God loves us. That's what we were always striving for. And that's what she did.
Right. It reminds me of a beautiful Bible verse that we find in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, that says, it's talking about the nativity story. And, it says, when the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let's go to Bethlehem and see that this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about. And then it goes, so they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph lying, and the baby lying in a manger. And when they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. And all heard it were amazed at what the shepherds were saying. But then this beautiful verse, but Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. And I love just thinking that here everyone's going in amazement, talking about all these great things. And, in the Jewish custom, as many of you already know, is that back in those days, when a young girl was reaching maturity, that she was, they would oftentimes be marrying her off. And so, we're talking about a very young person that is, saying the eternal yes, as you beautifully stated, Brandi. And then you just see this, so even in the maturity of just pondering all of these things in her heart, and so that's just we kind of think of this all this happening in a moment, but this is over a period of time, and it's extraordinary to think just how much she dedicated to God, even with everything around her saying the opposite.
Right. Just an incredible, the submission of her will for God's will and to trust in that process is such an example really to us all, and to carry with us throughout our lives. Just in final, we have so many more questions we want to ask you about this book. We need another hour. I know we need another hour, and I feel like every chapter I'm going to want to follow up with all of my questions. But what is your hope for anyone who picks up this book? And as you wrote it, what were you hoping that this book accomplishes? What would your encouragement be for people who pick up this book?
Just to give someone an example of how to develop a relationship with her, what might that look like? I don't know where to start. How do I pray? Where do I go? What does this mean? What's the history of her life? Just to give you some real life experience and example that if you're like me, a seeker of other people's stories so that you can better understand what's going on and what to expect, that might be something that could be useful for you, and I wrote this book not being interested in arguing or convincing anyone of who Mary was or anything like that. It was just a way for God not only, first of all, to improve my life, but then through the one gift that I feel like I can give, which is maybe writing to people, to give them something that I couldn't find on my own. And so I hope it helps. I hope it's something that is beneficial and that other people read and maybe sparks conversation or an idea or, a long walk with her, contemplating some of these things. And, I hope sincerely that it is a benefit for people now and for time to come. And if you have questions or you want to connect, let me know. And I would love to continue discussing this with anyone who's interested.
Brandi, how could people reach you? Because we have had actually 2 more questions just come in to our email. How could people reach out to you?
Well, I have a website. It is my name, www.BrandiWillisSchreiber.com. If you Google my name, it's probably going to come up because there's not a lot of people. There's only one of me. So you can contact me on my website. You can connect with me via email through there. I'm more than happy to connect with you. I've also got a very measly little Facebook author page that needs some content built up on it, but you can message me through that. You can find me on Facebook. I'd be more than happy to connect with you that way.
Awesome.
Well, Brandi, thank you so much. Once again, for all of our listeners, the book is called A Long Walk with Mary, A Personal Search for the Mother of God. You can find it right here on Ancient Faith. You simply go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com. You can also find it on Amazon.com. But Brandi, we just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And it's really kind of, as I was mentioning earlier, just allowing us to kind of meet Mary in our own life. Yes. And, I think that I encourage all of our listeners to just take a look at this book. But thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And to our listeners, we thank you so much for joining us. We, as always, encourage you to stay strong in your walk of faith. God bless you.
Thank you.
Orthodox music, lectures, prayers, and more on Ancient Faith Radio. Thanks for your support.
This is Ancient Faith Today with Father Tom Soroka, a weekly live call-in show addressing the issues of our day from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Welcome to Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. We'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Trudy will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. To participate online, we encourage you to go either to the AFR Facebook page at facebook.com/Ancient Faith Radio and place a question there in the thread for tonight's show, where it is now being live simulcast. Or you can also go to facebook.com/Ancient Faith Today and place your question there in the thread for tonight's show. You can also send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. So let's get started. Tonight, we're starting a new series that will be staggered throughout our weekly shows called answering objections. While it seems like a negative, somewhat defensive approach, we certainly already have a plethora of wonderful podcasts, books, and blogs that present the Orthodox faith in a clear and, I think, convincing manner. However, we're calling this answering objections in response to the growing number of videos and blogs and articles written by detractors of the Orthodox faith, usually called something like Why I'm Not Orthodox, or even more shockingly, Why I Left the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, don't misunderstand me. The internet isn't filled with these presentations, but there is definitely a growing number of fairly high-profile internet personalities among Roman Catholics and Protestants that have the Orthodox Church in their crosshairs. On the one hand, praise God, our efforts to educate and evangelize and bring people into the church is having an effect. We're being noticed. On the other hand, these presentations that are being given are often going unanswered. They're a kind of one-way street. When someone's going through the painful process of seeking out the Orthodox faith, it's likely they'll encounter these anti-Orthodox resources, and we need to have a well-reasoned answer for them. So, these programs are not simply going to be linear presentations, a list of differences. There are already numerous resources that do that. Instead, what we're going to do is take each program head on. We're going to quote the words and the charges of our detractors in a specific presentation, and we're going to answer them directly. We need to have a reason for the hope that is in us. We need to speak the truth in love. But maybe, just maybe, more importantly, we need to listen to our critics carefully so we can learn if there's something else going on here besides just doctrinal differences. So tonight, as we begin this new series, we're going to respond to a specific presentation that was recently released on the Catholic YouTube program called Pints with Aquinas, hosted by Matt Fradd. The name of that episode we're going to respond to is Why I Chose Catholicism Over Eastern Orthodoxy with Michael Lofton. Mr. Lofton is known for his Reason and Theology YouTube channel. And to help kick off this important series of programs, we'd like to welcome Dr. Daniel Latierre. Father Daniel is a pastor of St. Herman of Alaska Orthodox Church in Port Townsend, Washington. He was a Catholic seminarian for 5 years and a Catholic high school theology teacher for 4 years. He received his PhD in systematic theology from Duquesne University in 2012, which is a Roman Catholic university. And after receiving his PhD, he served as vice president of Intellectual Takeout, a think tank in the Twin Cities, where he published numerous articles on cultural, social, and educational issues. He was ordained to the priesthood in 2019. Father Daniel and his wife, Matushka Kelly, have 5 children. Father Daniel, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Thank you for having me, Father Tom.
I appreciate you very much. I gave you a little bit of short notice there, but the first thing I want to ask you, and I'm embarrassed, did I get your last name right? And I'm sorry if I butchered it.
Oh no, it's no problem. I mean, I inherited the pronunciation of Latierre from my dad. The French would be Latierre. You know, Latierre.
Okay, I wondered about that. Very good.
Yeah, which I found out in 10 years ago is actually the French version for Eleutherius. For, you know,
that's great. Wonderful.
There's a town in France named Saint-Latierre, and for Saint Eleutherius. So
that's wonderful.
That was
that's quite
one more
twist.
sign pointing me toward orthodoxy, I guess.
Thank God. Thank God. Thank God. Yeah. That's wonderful. Father Daniel, before we actually get to the questions, and I tried to set this up as clearly as possible, my hope was I was going to have audio clips from the program, from the actual program. That may be a future goal of mine. It became really burdensome to do that. So I'm just going to try to summarize the points as best I can. But before we do that, just tell us a little bit about your story, if you would, please, especially about how you came to the Orthodox faith. I would appreciate that.
Sure. And please, cut me off if I'm going on too long. I grew up in a family with a dad who wasn't Catholic, and my mom would take my brothers and I to church. That became difficult about third grade. We would go to the Roman Catholic Church. I was baptized Roman Catholic. And, I went to public schools. In high school, I went to a Catholic high school with the idea that, well, this will help me get into a good college. It wasn't for religious purposes. And, my first year there was kind of lonely. I didn't, I was leaving my friends behind to go to this new school. Second year started off the same way, but I was sitting in class one day, my New Testament class, and all of a sudden this surge of feeling of divine love came over me. And I'd never been someone who prayed before. And, I went to church maybe once a year, but that, and then 2 weeks later, I was walking along the street in downtown Seattle where my school was. And all of a sudden this thought came that I'm supposed to be a priest. And that filled me with immense peace. So, I tried to grow in my faith as much as I could, and ended up going to Roman Catholic College Seminary for 4 years, and spent 6 months in Rome studying at the pontifical universities there, and then a year at graduate seminary at Mundelein Seminary in north of Chicago.
Was Bishop Barron there then at that time?
He was. I took a couple of classes with him.
Yeah. He's a towering internet figure.
Yes, it was right before he was becoming, right before he became a towering internet figure. I was there 2001, 2002, but he was kind of being pegged as kind of like a superstar, for the future. Right. When I was there, so he was on the cusp of it. I was in seminary when the whole priest scandal erupted, but that wasn't why I left seminary. It was just a convergence of factors, and met my wife, and the year after I left, she had grown up going to a Byzantine Catholic church from the time she was age 14, and this Byzantine Catholic church, a Ruthenian one, you'll know that being out in Pittsburgh.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah. It was filled with kind of refugees from Roman Catholic parishes who were really dissatisfied. And they really...
And that seems to be very common these days. Even this Matt Fradd, who has this Pints with Aquinas program, he attends a Ruthenian church.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. So
crazy.
And after a few times going there, because it takes a little bit to with the culture shock with the East. Coming from Roman parishes, I was just blown away by the deep, biblically based patristic theology of the prayers. In the Catholic Church, like Father Richard John Newhouse kind of derogatorily said that in the Catholic Mass, every prayer had come to sound like, oh God, help us love you and ourselves better. Amen. There's that principle. There's that principle, lex orandi, lex credendi, the law of praying is the law of believing. But you couldn't really get that much in the Catholic Mass anymore because it becomes so watered down. Also in the Catholic Church, I had this desire to feel the rhythms of the liturgical year, to just make the faith the center of my life and culture at home and in the parish. But that was really hard to do in the Catholic Church. I mean, they just had lost a lot of the traditions associated with feasts.
No
mean,
fasting. Yeah,
had lost the fasting and all this. So it was really difficult. And I found that in the Byzantine Catholic Church, you know, so, and then in addition, I think in my Catholic life, like I just never really quite felt at home with the devotional life and the prayer life. And I think like a lot of Catholics, that's why a lot of Catholics seek refuge in the intellectual side of things, because there seems to be this dissonance between the intellectual and the devotional. The devotional is very much anti-intellectual.
Very interesting.
You know, some of these devotionals like the Sacred Heart and Divine Mercy actually, you know, originated in response to this over intellectualization of the Catholic faith. So when coming to the East, it's like the Jesus prayer, and it was just like so clear, and there was this unity between the theology and the liturgy and the spirituality. I just kind of got hooked on that. And you know, eventually after teaching high school, I went to a doctoral program at Duquesne where I decided to focus on the differences between Orthodox and Catholic because, you know, I was really enamored with the East. I felt like this was the one path, but, you know, I still felt, well, the Catholic Church is the true church because that's where the Pope is. And if you're in union with the Pope, that's the sign of the true church. And so my hope was to work for, you know, unity and with ecumenical issues. You know, got my dissertation. Where I come to Orthodoxy is that ended up moving to Minnesota, getting the job at the think tank. Both in Pittsburgh and in the Twin Cities, our Byzantine Catholic Church in Seattle was very vibrant, filled with young families. Going to a lot of the Byzantine Catholic churches in Pittsburgh and then in the Twin Cities, like we were one of the only ones with kids who would go to church there. And, you know, I understand there are Orthodox churches on the East Coast that probably have the same issue too in certain places. Yeah. But that was at least, it started out as kind of an existential crisis. Now, and keep in mind, I'd been immersed in Orthodox theology for a number of years too, and, you know, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. But then I started kind of thinking like, you know, and, you know, I was worried about what it would do to my kids' faith. Like, how can you make the church the center of your culture if they don't have any friends there? You know, it's a place that they see as something that's dying. And I wouldn't have wanted any of them to grow up to be an Eastern Catholic priest. You know, that's just that can be in a lot of places in this country, a pretty lonely life because you're not welcome among Orthodox clergy, really, and then you're not at home among Roman Catholic clergy.
The Latins, right?
So those were kind of some of the existential questions. And then I posed this question to my wife. I said, if we moved somewhere and there was no Byzantine Catholic Church, which was a possibility, would we go back to a Roman Catholic parish? And we said, well, no, because really for us, the East, you know, quote unquote East, I think it's of it just as Christianity, but
thank you so much. Thank you.
That was our path to salvation, you know, and I mean, we were going to go back to a parish where our kids who had been receiving communion since they were infants weren't no longer going to be able to receive. So then I said, well, what are we doing in this, like, in this Via Media, this island of Eastern Catholicism where we feel like we have things in common with the Orthodox, but we're not in formal union. We're in formal union with Roman Catholics. And we feel increasingly, you know, not in union with them theologically, spiritually, liturgically. So that was my point at which it's like, okay, well, the papacy is really the last thing, because, and this is, I think, where in something you see in Michael Lofton, whose video that we're examining tonight, you see this come out there, is as a Catholic, you're taught that union with the Pope is the sign of the true church. So if you're trying to be a faithful Catholic, you end up having a lot of problems with lots of things. You know, you may very well go to a parish where the liturgy, the mass, is very uninspiring, where the church is very
he talks
ugly,
about that.
Where you know, you don't, you know, there's really poor catechesis, you know, homilies are pretty rough, but you're supposed to kind of close your eyes and say la 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 la, you know, but we're in union with the Pope and there's real presence in the Eucharist. And so you know that. But when I actually started to look more in depth at the history of the development of the papacy, that, you know, that's when I became a bit, you know, had more question about that. And you really do just see kind of historically how it changed during the time of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. And in some ways, I have sympathy with that, because there was really a power vacuum that developed in the West, and the papacy kind of stepped up to fill that vacuum. But I think the papacy ended up then becoming something, you know, that was a deviation from the spirit of the Gospels, from the spirit of the Fathers.
I don't want you to go too far down that road, because we're going to get to the issue of the papacy and the questions. So
good, I asked you to cut me off, so thank you.
I'm not doing that, other than to say that you eventually, obviously, made the decision to come into the church, and then did you attend Orthodox seminary?
Just for a year.
Which is common when somebody's already attended. I was just curious there.
Well, because I had those years at Catholic seminary. I had a PhD,
of course,
in theology, where
I'd
did my dissertation under Orthodox priests too.
Interesting. Very good. All right. Thank you, Father Daniel. Well, we're happy that you made that decision, and let's get right to the video and the claims made in the video. I want to remind our listeners, 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. If you have a specific question that you'd like to ask Father Daniel, please feel free to call in, or we're checking the threads of the various Facebook pages, or send us an email. We'll be happy to answer that. All right. So, Father Daniel, let's begin. About 30 minutes into the video, basically what Michael Lofton says, and this one I don't have a specific quote for him, but I'm summarizing what he said. He basically said that the reason that he had initially left Catholicism was because he had encountered bishops and teachers who had promoted ecumenism, scandals, liberalism. He was encountering scandals, that is, not that they were promoting them. That there was liberalism in the church, and that these bishops were soft on moral issues. But then when he became Orthodox, and I believe he was going to a church in Chicago area, I won't talk about the jurisdiction, we'll just kind of leave that alone. He said that he basically was encountering the same thing. He was encountering letters from the bishop that were promoting liberal issues. The bishop was having joint prayer services with the local Roman bishop. There was a financial scandal. There were, and as we know, there are various liberal Orthodox websites that are pushing a liberal agenda. So I guess the first question would be, is that a kind of a legitimate reason to say, hey, what's the difference? Because I'm getting liberalism in the Catholic Church, I'm getting liberalism in the Orthodox Church. If I'm going to weigh both sides and I'm going to go Catholic, then I might as well just go Catholic.
Well, yeah, I guess it depends how he's defining the terms, but also, if he was leaving Catholicism because he expected to come into the Orthodox Church and not find problems, or that the scales would weigh and there would be fewer problems in the Orthodox Church than the Catholic Church, I mean, he might have been setting himself up for failure. I mean, if that was one of kind of the principal criteria by which he made that jump, or if that was his hope, you know, I mean, one of my difficulties with coming into the Orthodox Church, I'll say, was that in the Catholic Church, they kind of pride themselves on having a nice tight ship of unity. And, you know, then looking at the Orthodox Church as a Catholic, and you've got overlapping jurisdictions and, you know, sometimes a squabble pops up. So that was something to think. I mean, but for me, you know, I looked at the other things. You know, and the evidence weighed in favor of the Orthodox Church, which is just like a more coherent theology of the sacraments. You know, the means by which we come to participate in Christ and to become divine. You know, just that they'd preserved really a mature ascetical tradition, not just with fasting, but just with prayer, with the view of life, our faith life as one of ascent. You know, we're in the, you know, following the Sunday of the divine ladder, that just concept of ascent in spiritual life, you don't find as much in the Catholic Church. So I was more looking at all those things, you know, and I wasn't as bothered by, you know, some of the, you know, hierarchical
shenanigans,
you know, that pop up. I mean, but that's been with the church from the beginning. I mean, during the Arian crisis, most of the bishops in the world were Arian, you know.
Absolutely. Now, that's not to excuse bad behavior. It's not to excuse scandals. No. But it's to say that, look, you know, a human divine institution is not going to be perfect. And so either way. And the other thing that I wanted to say is, just kind of for full disclosure, this particular video, which I already named, this particular point is at minute 30. So let's just say that. All right. Father Daniel, let's go on to the next one. This is at minute 33. And he says, Michael Lofton said, the Roman Catholic Church has a better claim to authority in the first millennium. As I continued to study the matter, I wasn't seeing it in favor of Eastern Orthodoxy. If the papacy is an institution established by Christ and I'm not in communion with it, that's going to impact my relationship with Jesus. And then I think he goes on to quote one of the Roman Catholic ecumenical councils that basically says, you know, if you turn away from the Catholic faith after having known it, you'll lose your salvation. So
I mean, that statement is actually from Vatican II. It's from a document called Lumen Gentium, which says, you know, only, you know, it says basically people can be saved even if they're not Catholic. The only people who are completely out are those who know, who with certitude know the Catholic Church is the true church and don't join themselves to it. Now, who those people are who know with an absolute certitude that the church is the true church and don't join it, I don't know who this category of people is, but, you know, you know, but
So in terms of the idea of the papacy, you know, as an institution established by Christ, actually, you were going into that topic when you were talking about your conversion story. So let's examine that just a little bit. What's your take on the idea of, you look at the papacy in the year 2021, and you see what it is. And I mean, maybe the height of the power of the papacy was, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But today it's still obviously a significant force. He is the bishop of bishops. He has direct jurisdiction over every single Roman Catholic. Do we as Orthodox Christians see a disconnect between the papacy, that is the Bishop of Rome, in the first millennium and what we see today?
Well, absolutely. You look at our church, there's more kind of a decentralized character to it, because our ecclesiology is rooted really in liturgy, like the title of that Bishop John Zazoulis book, Bishop Eucharist Church, that each local church headed by the bishop is an image of, the universal church, the church in its fullness.
Kind of the Ignatian model.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And we look back and you can't see that in really the first millennium, and it really was toward the end of the first millennium, with the rise of kind of the Frankish Empire and Charlemagne and their kind of disputes with the East, that you really see the Pope thrust more into this role of power. Now, I think as Orthodox, a serious Orthodox will admit the principle of papal primacy. I think, based on the ecumenical councils, we have to do that. And I think, yeah.
How can you just summarize what we would understand to be papal primacy in the undivided church?
Well, how we would frame that is kind of difficult. Yeah, because it's very much a point under discussion, right? But that, that the Pope had a primacy of honor, that they had a special role maybe in calling ecumenical councils, whether, but that's a question whether that particular role in the first millennium would apply still now. That the papacy was particularly known for its orthodoxy in those first centuries, in those years, the first 7 ecumenical councils, but interestingly, Rome's primacy was based at the time of the ecumenical councils, was based in Rome's position in the empire.
I think that has to be underlined, highlighted, red circle. I don't think there's any way to get around that. If you look at the wording of the canon, it says because it is the capital of the empire, and then it refers to Constantinople, right? To say now Constantinople is the new Rome because it is the capital of the empire. There has to be the idea of the connection of Rome as the center of the empire, and that's why it's has the primacy, and not just because of Peter, et cetera, et cetera. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, absolutely. And really also the reverence due to Rome of Christians in the first few centuries was not necessarily because this was viewed as the see of the first pope. There's still a question of whether Peter was actually the first bishop of Rome. That's not a certitude. It was because the relics of Peter and Paul were both there in Rome that this, this city had a special preeminence. For listeners, I'll say one of the best presentations, I think, of the development of the papacy in the first millennium is actually by a Roman Catholic theologian, a Dominican named Jean-Marie Tillard. It's a book called The Bishop of Rome. And he really, I think, gives one of the best presentations of the development of the papacy, and the reason why Rome had kind of that special honor.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's actually one of the books that made me Orthodox.
Then we've got to get that. All right. Father Daniel, thanks for that answer. What we're going to do is we're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, we have a caller on the line, Daniel from Memphis. We'll take his call. Stay with us, 1-855-237-2346. We're talking answering the objections of Roman Catholics to Orthodoxy. We will be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
It began in 2004 with one streaming station playing Orthodox hymns and chants in many different languages, and a few talk programs and lectures as we could find them. About 10 years later, we added a talk channel and made the music channel, well, all music. Today, I'm pleased to announce a third streaming channel on Ancient Faith Radio, introducing the English Language Music Channel. You now have 3 choices on the Ancient Faith app and website. Share the good news with your friends and family. And as always, thanks so much for your financial support that makes it all possible.
Back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
We are back with Father Daniel Latierre, and we're talking about answering the objections of Roman Catholicism. This is a new series, multi-episode series, and this is part 1. So, Father Daniel, let's go to the line. We're going to take a call from Daniel from Memphis. Daniel, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Hello. Thank you for taking
welcome.
my call.
Absolutely. How can we help you?
2 quick questions. Now, one may be out of place, and if it is, just let me know.
No worries.
I grew up in the Roman faith and am going through some very serious questioning right now. There's no Eastern Rite parish here in Memphis, okay? But one thing I wondered, since the Eastern Rite people are under the Pope, at any time in theory, the Pope could say, oh, you can't have what you're doing anymore. You are all Latins. To me, is the Eastern Rite sort of like to coin a phrase, a Vichy Orthodox situation?
Father Daniel?
If anybody knows what Vichy is.
I'm not sure what that...
Yeah, can you flesh out what you mean by that, Daniel?
Yeah, well, Vichy France was independent in name, but it was a part of France that was not directly occupied in World War II until 1942 November.
Yeah, it's a very good observation. I want Father Daniel to answer. I'm going to give my own take on this. Just for full disclosure, my mother was Byzantine Catholic before she married my dad. I have wonderful relatives that are Byzantine Catholic, so I'm pretty familiar with the whole situation. And as Father Daniel said, being in Pittsburgh, this is like, Orthodox Byzantine Catholic Mecca here. So, Father Daniel, what's your take on the idea of Rome's intervention in the Eastern Rite churches of Catholicism?
Yeah, it hasn't been the direction it's been going, since Vatican II, if not perhaps a little before. I mean, I know Rome has been saying they want the Eastern churches to be fully Eastern. Of course, there can be that fear. I think among Orthodox, they look at kind of the jurisdictional prerogative of the Pope and, would be afraid that, they could be subject to some overhaul like that. And, not without reason historically, if you look what happened to the Eastern Catholic churches. I mean, there was a Catholic bishop in St. Paul, Bishop John Ireland, who, at the end of the 19th century, St. Alexis Toth was an Eastern Catholic priest who had gone to serve in Minneapolis. But I mean, Bishop Ireland was very derogatory toward him because he'd been married to at one point. And, so
we jokingly call Bishop Ireland the founder of the OCA.
Right. Yeah. The apostle to orthodoxy, I mean, right. Because, St. Alexis ended up, joining the Orthodox Church and going around the country saying, hey, we've been hoodwinked,
Right.
we've got to come back to the Orthodox faith. So that's my take. It hasn't been the direction it's been going in with Rome, but who knows for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just add to this, Daniel, that, they're right after that episode, Rome came down pretty heavy on the Eastern Catholics and disallowed them in the United States to have married priests. And that really was not lifted until quite recently. And in certain circles, it's still kind of a touchy subject because it takes several generations to kind of move in that direction and get back those authentic traditions. What I will say from my standpoint is the Eastern Catholics really, many of them, most of them, really want to be deeply, deeply Orthodox, both in ritual and in spirit. But I think we have to say this honestly, and if I'm offending anyone, please forgive me, but often Eastern Catholics of whatever stripe are treated like the redheaded stepchildren of the Catholic Church. They're quite small, and the Roman Church is so enormous that it's very difficult for them. So I just want to add that. Daniel, go to your second question, please.
I'll go to my second question and then hang up.
Okay, thank you.
It is this. How can the Catholic Church in theory, or at least the hierarchy, tell Orthodox they are wrong and then go to the Muslims and give them, like the Pope, it's rumored he went to a mosque and kissed the Quran and told people, oh, you don't have to be Christian to go to heaven and all this other stuff. Of course, one can't read what's in people's hearts. I'm not talking about that. But in the Bible, it does say that by no other name, the name of Jesus, is anyone to be saved. And now what God does with the Muslims who don't know any better, that's God's business.
Well, let's address your question. Go ahead, Father Daniel.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, that's just a tough question. An ongoing kind of theological debate is, in terms of, who can be saved, who can't, the proper ecclesiology. I would say in the Second Vatican Council, there was a document called Nostra Aetate on, the place of other religions. And I think it wasn't really a well-worded document. It caused a lot of confusion. There wasn't really much of an evangelical impetus in it because it's saying, hey, like the Muslims and us, we share the same God, That may or may not be the truth. That's kind of up for debate, but, it's, it caused a lot of confusion. And Pope Francis is not really, like a dogmatically nuanced Pope, Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI were more kind of rigorous theologians. And so, Pope Francis, he's not going to necessarily take into account all the theological nuances, and
he said a few whoppers, right? Yeah, I think the other the other thing that I would add is that the Pope, at least the present Pope, and I think even Benedict, not John Paul so much because I think he was sort of shunned by at least the Russian church. They've been really very gracious to the Orthodox Church. We received relics back from them. And then this particular Pope Francis has been very, very close to Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople. And there's a lot of rhetoric going on about how, we are separated sister churches, et cetera, breathe with both lungs, et cetera. And so I think, I think they've treated us quite well. And, the idea that Orthodox Christians are, according to Roman Catholic practice, permitted to receive communion in a Catholic church. Of course, we are not permitted. Let's make that very clear from our standpoint, but they would let us. And I think that kind of speaks to where they're at.
Sure.
Thanks, Father Daniel. Okay, let's go to the next point here. This is at minute 36:45, and it deals with the sort of divisions. There's been a lot of talk amongst the Roman Catholic apologists, especially that are saying, hey, look at the Orthodox. They're fighting with one another. Russia and Constantinople are excommunicating each other, etc. And so what he says at 36:45, some of the people in my Greek Orthodox Church were telling me that, quote, the patriarch, that is Bartholomew, is a heretic. They were siding with Russia, that is the Russian patriarch, but were still in communion with the Patriarch of Constantinople. So how would you answer somebody comes to you, Father Daniel, and says, you know what, if you're the true church, you all sure don't look like it because you're so divided?
I mean, here's the thing. I would absolutely agree that the faithful should not be openly critiquing hierarchs or, calling a patriarch a heretic. I mean,
happens a lot these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we live in, kind of a, forgive me, with the internet and all that. And, people feel empowered, to do these things. They read some of the blogs. I would say actually, in my experience, and take it for what you will, I found much more reverence for hierarchy among the Orthodox faithful in the parishes I've been at than in the Catholic Church.
Really?
When I was a Catholic, I mean, if you're faithful Catholic, trying to live according to more traditional teachings, you're usually, looking at everything the Pope says and critiquing this and not this and this and this and not this. Your local bishops, you a lot of times really kind of ignore a lot of things they say because they're there to perform confirmations at parishes, and you probably think your local bishop is a liberal, so you're going to listen to this bishop in Denver or this cardinal here. You're not going to listen to these bishops. So, that's kind of part of Catholic life, is like critiquing bishops and pointing out the things they say that you disagree with. It's kind of an interesting thing. I think, like, Protestantism, you have that idea of private judgment, but if I reflect back on my Catholic years, like, that's kind of what I did a lot, is like, I had an idea of what the true faith was and true doctrine. And, I judged whether what came from the hierarchs constantly was the true faith and what wasn't, and what I had to listen to and what I didn't have to listen to. I just haven't found that same climate in the Orthodox Church. Now, and certainly when there's a crisis, you're going to have that. You had it with the COVID stuff, with the masks, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You have it with Constantinople and Moscow, as, you get the blogosphere going, and, but on the whole, I found, a very healthy and, I've been, really just, pleasantly surprised by that, the reverence toward bishops among the Orthodox faithful. Hello?
I'm sorry, I didn't have my on button on. I was just going to say that, you have a whole Catholic YouTube channel called Church Militant that does nothing but expose scandals and criticize bishops. And I'm not saying that scandals shouldn't be exposed, but it's just a constant barrage of, really scrutinizing every single thing that's said. And it's tough. It's very, very difficult.
No, I mean, and you have Catholics, speak triumphantly of the magisterium, and that we have that in the Catholic Church. Well, the magisterium, the teaching authority of the church, is the bishops, but they're spending their time critiquing bishops all the time, openly, and I'm of course I'm fine with people disagreeing with things privately, but putting that out there publicly, I mean, is that really Christian? It just seems like another form of Protestantism to me, honestly.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because at 1 hour, right at the 1 hour mark, here's what Michael Lofton says. He says, as I was Orthodox, my questions weren't being answered satisfactorily. He talks about that again and again. And I think you touched on that, the idea of the intellectual exercise of Catholicism. So he says, as I was Orthodox, my questions weren't being answered satisfactorily. The Catholic Church was answering my questions, especially when it came to the papacy, teaching authority. What's an ecumenical council? Is an ecumenical council infallible? And he says parenthetically, that's up to for debate among some Orthodox. So how do I even identify this teaching authority in Orthodoxy? And that's basically the claim that he lays. He says, Orthodox, ask 5 Orthodox and you'll get 6 different answers. Whereas in Catholicism, you have a magisterium, and you have, I've been told that before. They said, it's very comforting because I can pick up the official catechism of the Roman Catholic Church. I can turn to page 62 and there's the answer. So what say you?
It's more an illusion of clarity. So in terms of my questions weren't being answered satisfactorily, I mean, that's not surprising to hear. I mean, what percentage of our priests are, going to be well-versed in Roman Catholicism and be able to,
the finer points
compare,
of that,
all of these points, I mean, if I were to go to a Catholic priest and ask them to speak about Orthodoxy, I mean, if I were to, tell a Catholic priest, like, hey, I'm, reading about theosis and the fathers and all this, they would,
essence, energies,
75%
distinction.
of them would not know what you're talking about, at least, and the other 25% wouldn't really be able to say much. So,
good.
So, I mean, it's not that big of a surprise that the questions weren't being answered satisfactorily if you go to a parish. In the Catholic Church, I mean, there was a Catholic theologian, Eric, and his last name is Polish, I'll probably butcher the pronunciation, but Przywara, who described the last 500 years in the West as this fearful search for certitude, kind of a Cartesian desire for clear and distinct. And so I think you have to remember that, take into consideration that epistemology and the expectations of that in the philosophical currents kind of underlie how the desire Catholics have for things. And so, in the early 20th century, maybe before I forget when it came out, among Catholics for catechesis of young people, they had something called the Baltimore Catechism, which was this very rote question and answer format of things. Question 1, who is God? God is the supreme being. Ding, you get the answer, right? Why did God make man? God made man to know him, to love him, to serve him in this life, and to be happy with him forever in the next.
Wow.
Ding,
that.
You get that.
The answer, the definitive answer.
The answer. So in terms of like things like the papacy and infallibility, you know, a lot of Catholics will think of this as like, well, the buck needs to stop somewhere. And like with all the confusion, there needs to be somewhere where you can go and say, well, here is the clear answer. Except you don't actually necessarily get that from infallibility. So the Pope says something infallibly. The definition of papal infallibility and primacy at Vatican I, you know, the First Vatican Council in 1869 to 70. So, you know, the Pope is infallible when speaking on faith and morals, you know, ex cathedra, you know, not from the consensus of the church. Well, then you have a period of reception, though, where theologians pick out all that wording and what does that actually mean? And when is something infallible? And then, you know, so the Pope says something and then everyone debates, was he infallible when he was saying this? Was he not? You know, and there's no...
Well, they're doing it today with Francis.
Yeah. And there's no absolute definitive answer that you can point to and find to that. And I mean, if the Pope says something infallibly, who are the ones that are going to listen to him? It's those who are faithful Catholics. It's not an authority for those wishy-washy Catholics or people who are outside the Catholic Church. So underlying it is this faith you've placed in this particular bishop, you know, you know, which we do in the Orthodox Church too. We say, you know, Christ speaks to us through the bishops, you know, sometimes they're, you know, right. Sometimes they say things that are a little off, you know,
sure.
You know,
right.
But, you know, yeah. So,
I think that's why the definition of an ecumenical council that, for instance, Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeyev gives is right on the money. You know, in other words, there has to be that reception, which takes time, and you understand that to be an ecumenical council. And it's not about the Pope of Rome signing on the dotted line and boom, all of a sudden it's ecumenical. And that's essentially what Lofton is and Eric Ibarra and so forth are saying, is that, you know, we don't have a clear, you know, singular understanding of what an ecumenical council is. And I think, you know, like you said, the answer is, yeah, that's right. You know,
well, but and, you know, I would think they would understand that in the Catholic Church, because that's kind of what their podcast is devoted to, right? Is just like, you know, well, the Catholic Church says it's infallible, so we've got to go find the support for that in history and constantly kind of talk about it and examine it, you know, to
interesting.
You know, but you know, one of the concepts I came out, you know, it seems like among some Catholics, there's this desire for an external authority apart from the living out of one's faith. And it seems to me a good analogy of that, and who knows if it's fair or not, it is that original sin is, you know, God originally calls Adam and Eve to this path of ascesis, you know, by which they're called to grow into the likeness of him. But instead, they decide to try to do an end around God and take a shortcut and give authority to something external to them, namely this fruit that will provide certitude, you know, for that becoming godlike, you know, where there's more mystery with that, you know, ascetical path, you know, to grow in God's likeness. You know, and you know, people, the Slavophiles like Komiakov talk about this idea of an external authority that you see in, you know, the Roman Catholic understanding of authority and desire for infallibility.
Interesting. All right. I want to just get to two more questions here, at least, if we can. And this one's a little prickly, Father Daniel. And, you know, I don't know. I get a sense that you are familiar with the orthosphere, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, there's a lot of toxicity out there Sure. There are some very loud, quote unquote, Orthodox voices that are speaking without authority, and they're kind of sucking all the air out of the room, and they're not doing us any favors, to be perfectly honest. So here's what Lofton says, and this is at hour 1, minute 4, 25 seconds. He says, you'll find this online Orthodox group that tends to be very toxic. If that group of people has the truth, I would never know it by the way they behave. And the reason that I bring this up, Father Daniel, is I think we need to get this out in the open. I'm going to have a show about it, like, just in terms of the atmosphere of Orthodoxy online. But tell us a little bit about your feelings about how Orthodoxy is presented online by independent voices.
Yeah, perhaps, I don't know, I gave you the impression I was familiar with it. I'm really only minimally familiar with kind of the Orthodox.
Good. We're not going to name any names or anything
world.
like that. But
I've had to become a tiny bit more familiar with it during COVID times, having to minister to people in a parish. But
and they say, I watched the video by so-and-so, and
Yeah, I mean, I think, like the fathers say, the Desert Fathers, I've been sorry many times for things I've said. I've never been sorry for silence.
Right.
We have to, I get very suspicious when people without some sort of Episcopal mandate, and that goes for both Orthodox and Catholics, put themselves out there as in a prophetic role within the church. I might agree with Mr. Lofton there that, I mean, freely admit, I guess we have toxicity within Orthodoxy as well. We have, toxic people sometimes in parishes, and, and we, it can be a harm to our witness, but we hold this treasure in earthen vessels.
Right. Yeah. And I thank you so much. You said that so eloquently. And I might also just add that I don't think Orthodoxy cornered the market on toxic behavior of certain individuals. I would think that you can find that in pretty much any denomination, any online forum where there are people and things get heated and people want to assert their point and defend their position. And some people are better at it and more gracious at it than others. But I think you made the point very, very well. Let's look at one more, because I know we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to have to finish up here in a few minutes. They, the Orthodox, this is at minute 1 hour, 20 minutes, 45 seconds. They, the Orthodox, promote contraception under economia when the church fathers are plainly against it. How do you respond to that? Because that's a big one. Essentially, the Roman Catholics will say, oh, the Orthodox, they believe in divorce, which we don't. And they permit divorce. And I think that's just way too much of a black and white statement. And they permit contraception. And I think that's too much of a black and white statement. But let's answer what he said there, that they promote contraception under economia when the church fathers are plainly against it.
Yeah. So, the term promote contraception, I don't know any Orthodox priest that's celebrating, it. I would say it's pretty safe. There is a diversity of opinion out there to say that not using contraception, would maybe be an ideal. But the Orthodox teaching is kind of contextual. And again, I'm saying the Orthodox teaching, there's just a divergence of voices on this,
Exactly. And that's where they sort of corner us is they say, you guys don't even have one position. And I kind of shrug my shoulders and I say, so, we have a technology that was never available before.
So, and yeah, exactly. There is a question of like being on a different wavelength here, because Catholics, they look at themselves as like, we planted our flag in the sand on this one and everyone else has fallen. I'll say two things. I don't begrudge Catholics necessarily trying to hold a sort of line on contraception, but I would say their doctrine on that is not contextualized, really. So we live in a two-parent working household, non-agrarian economy, which, economically, children have become increasingly a burden. I don't think that's a good thing, but it's there. Is the Catholic Church really promoting some return to an agrarian lifestyle that makes it easy for people? Are parishes really working to financially help out families so that, they can really make it work with lots of kids? Maybe some of them are, but not others. But also, you do get these situations, and I've personally known people, Catholics with this, that the wife will get violently ill when she gets pregnant to the point of being hospitalized multiple times. And they deem it like, well, they can't have, they can't have children naturally the rest of the time. So that means if you're a Catholic, if you want to still have sexual intercourse, you have to practice natural family planning for life.
Right.
That means that, biologically at the woman's time when she's fertile, that tends to be when people most want to have sex. So you need a pretty strong ascetical life to uphold that if you're a younger couple and you've got to do that for decades on end here. At the same time, then the Catholic Church has really lost a lot of their ascetical tradition. They've lost a lot of the beauty in their worship that helps kind of support these things, like that kind of fasting. So it's like they uphold the teaching, but they've gotten rid of all those kind of supports for it, and they don't critique themselves for not having those supports. I
think the same thing is true about their unmarried priesthood. If you want to look at kind of what the sort of quote unquote problem is, I think that's a big one. You have unmarried priests, and there's not necessarily the strong ascetical backbone to support them, especially in that particular effort. So they kind of go hand in hand. This is a really good point.
I have a Catholic friend, and they're actually, maybe looking at things, but, she said something to me that I remembered is we have the Catholic Church doesn't even think that we can fast from fish on every Friday, but they expect, you to practice NFP for life.
It's too hard to not eat meat, right?
Right. There's kind of this disconnect there. And I would say too, the Catholic Church has economia. They just don't admit it, so
it goes the same for, it's the same for divorce, right? I mean, you can call it annulment all you want, but come on, these are semantics.
Catholic canon lawyers joke that a good canon lawyer can get anyone an annulment. People. Right. I've known people who've gotten annulments who have been were married 25 years, had 5 kids, and
Right. So and that's not to disrespect. Yeah, that's not to disrespect Catholics. And may I just add one more thing, and then we're going to wrap it up. And that is, maybe the Orthodox don't speak with the kind of one black and white voice regarding contraception, but our better writers and our better presentations. Go out and look at the encyclicals on marriage and family life on the Orthodox Church in America page, which I think is absolutely one of the clearest, best presentations on the subject. It is crystal clear that they say, you know, you as a married couple, you need to be thinking about having children, and you need to weigh all of these options, right. And you need to understand that you're limited to certain forms of contraception, but no matter if you use it, you will answer to God for that. And that's not just an economia blessing, like go ahead and do it. It's like, this is a serious thing. Now, we might be guilty of, you know, allowing this too much. And I think, in my personal opinion, I think maybe we did. We just kind of blow it off. We're not talking about it at all. But I think they're misrepresenting our position here.
Well, and they don't understand it, you know. I mean, again, they kind of look at it like we're being wishy-washy and liberal, and we're fallen just like the rest of Christians. So you know, there's just a lack of understanding, you know.
Excellent. Father Daniel, you just did such a great job, and I'm happy to meet you even online. If you ever come back to Pittsburgh, please, would love to get together with you. You and I are alumni of the Duquesne University. I was there much longer, much before you. And thank you so much. I appreciate your time tonight, and best wishes to you for the end of Lent and for Holy Pascha.
Thank you, you too. Thank you for having me, Father.
Thank you. Before I share a few final thoughts, I again want to offer my sincere thanks to Father Daniel for joining us tonight. Thanks to Trudy for engineering the program, for everybody that's listening in, those who gave us questions and those who called in. I'm not going to sort of rehash what we talked about, but I do want to read these words from the first letter of St. Peter. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, that when they defame you as evildoers, those who revile your good conduct in Christ may be ashamed. For it is better, if it is the will of God, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. Join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today. Good night, everybody.
America has a new Orthodox monastery, and they need your help today. The Mother of God, Joy of All Who Sorrow, is in Monteagle, Tennessee, nestled in the mountains about an hour north of Chattanooga. A small chapel is already on site, and services are being held. Pilgrimages, seminars, and spiritual direction will come in 2021. For more information, go to their website, monteaglemonastery.org. That's MONTEAGLE monastery.org. Or call them at 832-205-6959. Learn more and donate today.
Ancient Faith Radio thanks Gallery Byzantium for their support. Located in a charming historical coastal New England town, Gallery Byzantium is a small family-owned business that designs and handcrafts heirloom quality jewelry in the ancient Christian, Byzantine, Celtic, and Russian historic aesthetic tradition. All of their jewelry is handcrafted and designed in the U.S. of nickel-free recycled gold and silver. Gallery Byzantium designs are exclusive and one-of-a-kind. Absolute satisfaction is always guaranteed. More information is available at GalleryByzantium.com. That's GalleryByzantium.com.
In 1892, a young man left his home in the coastal foothills of Lebanon in search for a better life. Coming to America with his newlywed wife, he found work as a traveling peddler before settling on a small farm in central Nebraska. Years later, personal tragedy and an unexpected midnight visit from a saint changed the course of his life. Seeing the desperate need of his fellow Orthodox Christians and heeding God's call, he would spend the rest of his life traversing the Great Plains as a circuit-riding priest, known to his thousands of parishioners as Father Nicola Yanni. His legacy stands alongside that of Saint Raphael Hawawini, his mentor as a seminal force in the American Orthodox Church of our day. Here is His Grace, Bishop Basil.
He was ministering to his own people who had the Spanish flu. Even though he was warned that it was dangerous and, of course, very communicable, he insisted on visiting them, not only carrying to them the sacrament and anointing them, confessing them, preparing some of them for death, of course, but he also brought them groceries that they needed in their homes.
Apostle to the Plains. Available now on store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Glory to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit.
This is Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan Armitage, a live interactive call-in program where your questions about the Orthodox faith are addressed. Father Evan is the priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado. Call in your question at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here now is Father Evan.
Well, good evening and welcome to Orthodoxy Live. Christ is risen. This is your live call-in show about the Orthodox faith, her teachings, and her traditions. I'm your host, Father Evan, and we're streaming to you live here on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm glad you're with us this evening. It's the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, May 17th, 2020. I am glad you are with us. Of course, we look forward to taking your calls tonight, and you can reach us by dialing in at 1-855-237-2346, as our announcer mentioned, or 1-855-AF-RADIO. You can also get to us at ancientfaith.com. If you just scroll over to the live radio button on the home page and then scroll down to Orthodoxy Live, there you can record a question while we're on air, or if you're